up, y'all? Happy weekend. Hopefully you guys are having a good one out there. We are officially at 50 episodes, if you can believe it. So super exciting for me. This journey has been so amazing, and I don't feel like I'm anywhere near done yet, so I can't see where we go next. But seriously, thank you so much to all my listeners who make this possible, and especially for those of you that are sharing my content with other people. Freaking love that. I love to hear it. And speaking of OG loyal listeners, we have one joining us today. We have the lovely Taryn. She is the only person I personally know that is obsessed with everything space, and I basically only know who Neil deGrasse Tyson is because of her. So, yeah.
All right. Hey, Maggie. Thank you so much for having me on this episode. I didn't realize till you said it just now, this is the 50th one. This is amazing. I can't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
Got it so far. Yeah, I'm honored to be here, so thank you again. My name's Taryn. I'm at Edwards Air Force Base, so I live in Lancaster, California, the Antelope Valley, for anyone who's familiar. Just a desert plateau. There's not too much going on out here. I'm a weather forecaster in the Air Force. My hobbies right now, I like reading, definitely like listening to this podcast, shameless plug, and I still do like to get outside, and I used to play soccer. I like to play sports. I really enjoy exercise and just getting some fresh air. What do I want to be best known for? Honestly, I guess I would say probably being kind to other people and leaving a impact in my interactions, and I think that's part of your slogan too, so
hell
that
yeah,
goes with the theme. But that's pretty much it for me, honestly.
Hell yeah. Yeah, no, that's awesome. And before we really dive into our episode today about women kind of in leadership roles and things, especially in STEM backgrounds, I do want to get your story first. So how did you initially get into STEM? Like, what made you interested in it and, like, space stuff?
Oh, gosh. Okay. This is kind of a tough one. It's going to be a broad and hopefully not super vague answer, but basically my interest in space came from when I was at Scott Air Force Base, so my first duty station. It's a tough one to answer, honestly. I think I heard Star Talk, actually, which was a podcast that Neil deGrasse Tyson puts out every so often. I think he's still producing episodes. I'd have to check. Haven't listened in a while, but I really enjoyed listening, and he's a very articulate speaker, and he's a science popularizer by trade, so it's kind of his job to get people invested and interested in science and space in general. I mean, he's an astrophysicist, so that's kind of it's a natural direction that my interest would go as a listener of his podcast. Basically, what's attractive to me is how small we are.
Mm-hmm.
Not to be ominous or morbid, but we are infinitesimal, and that's not even doing it justice, to be honest. Our scale is just beyond comprehension, to be frank. I don't even know how to understand in my tiny brain how enormous and expansive the universe itself is and what could possibly be out there. I don't know about most people listening or you or anyone, because the common question is like, do you believe in aliens? And I think Neil deGrasse Tyson kind of summed it up, and a lot of people feel the same way, that to like sample the universe in such a small quantity that we've been able to, and then to say that you don't believe in aliens because you haven't seen one yet is kind of a hard way to justify that. So if you were just to dip a cup in the ocean and not come up with a fish, is the analogy that he made. And I think it's pretty relevant because the scale is not even close to the same, but you wouldn't expect to do that. So yeah, I would say that just the wonderment around the universe and space in general, what could be out there, is what draws me to it.
Yeah, and that's just so cool too, because like I said, I don't really know a bunch of people. I don't really know anybody that's into space like that. And so I don't know, it's just like so, not to be like the quirky girl, but it's like so unique and interesting to me, you know, just because you don't normally hear about it. And especially, I mean, you know how it is. Like, just being a girl in the military in itself, like there's not many of us out there, right? And so I think you being a female in the military and now in like leadership roles and you're in a STEM background, like I think it's excellent. I think it's fantastic. But then, so it was pretty recently then that you kind of got into it? Because that was what, like 9 years ago, 10 years ago?
Oh gosh, has it been 10 years? Don't say that. Yeah, I think it has been about 10 years. So it's been a long time, and since I started being interested in this stuff initially, I think I've learned quite a bit, and I don't know, even like the concept of black holes and antimatter, that stuff is forever interesting to me, so I could see myself feeling the same way probably for the rest of my life. Dang. And learning whenever I get the chance.
That's so cool. And then on the military side of things, when did you decide to go that route? Was it kind of just like a spur-of-the-moment decision when you were a senior, or did you just kind of always want to join?
Well, this is going to be a lot less glamorous and interesting probably than you might be looking for. But I think I'd had the conversation with my dad like in high school or something. And I was going to a junior college, relatively directionless. And he kept pitching me all of the benefits of the military, which there's no shortage of, really. And I know I sound like such a like blue person right now, and I don't mean to be cheesy, but really it's been amazing for me. I don't know what I would have done otherwise, but basically I was going to junior college. My car got stolen, and that morning when I opened the door and saw the car was gone, I was like, okay, this is definitely a sign. I don't know. I mean, I can't get to school anymore. I don't really have plans here, so I'll probably put my fate in the hands of something way bigger than myself and see if I can contribute. And I think that's pretty much why. I also really wanted to travel, which I've done a lot of, so it's been very fulfilling for me in that aspect.
Hell yeah. I love that. Hell yeah. Gotta love it, No, that's awesome. Yeah. So then, that's actually a perfect segue. Since we are talking about contributions in the Air Force, do you want to lead us off on what brought this episode on? And like, what made you bring this to me?
Okay, so I want to preface this with, it can be a touchy subject if misinterpreted. I think you can agree and probably know why I'm coming at it like that. The word feminism leaves kind of a weird taste in people's mouths at times. Mm-hmm. I don't know, like, if I embrace the more radical side of some of these ideologies, but for me, feminism means advocating for equal treatment, equal viewing of genders all around, like everyone, from a feminist perspective, because I'm a female. But anyway, really what happened was I met a lieutenant colonel in space weather class. I don't remember when it was. It was a few months ago, and we were all in class together. And I think he's met a lot of people because he's a German officer and he's in an exchange program. So he sent out to every female weather person that he knew this document that was being presented by RAND. And it's about women in peace and security. So it's a strategy document. And it's literally called that, U.S. Strategy and National Action Plan on Women, Peace, and Security. I think it's the second one that's ever been produced, maybe third. I think the first one might have come out in 2017, 2019, somewhere like that. So it's not like, it hasn't been going on forever, but they were doing a presentation on it, and I was sent an invitation to observe, and it was great. It's a lot more prevalent in higher level organizations, the strategy in this document, than I ever thought it was. So it was really enlightening, and I wanted to share it. I wanted to share the invitation with other people in my unit. And upon me suggesting this and sharing the idea of it with other people, I was obviously met with like some jokes, and you're in the military too. You've been in this environment. It's not uncommon, and honestly, it is kind of just, it's helpful to like break the ice around an otherwise kind of touchy subject or topic. Mm-hmm. To like kind of make jokes or whatever, which is fine. And I was okay with that. So I rolled with that, but then I told other people that are closer to me and not in my workplace that I wanted to share this, and they got kind of apprehensive, and they were like, ooh, I would be careful with who you share that with. And a lot of them were female, and that was a little shocking, just because I felt as though that specific demographic would be the most supportive. And then I text you, and I'm like, Maggie, I need to talk about this, because I didn't know that this was viewed the way that it is still. I think I might have had a little more faith in our progress in general in that area than maybe we have had, because to me, it's nothing. I was just like, this is super cool. We should definitely all be talking about this and watching this and learning and all that stuff. And to get the feedback I got it was not expected. So.
Well, no, I am so happy you brought this up to me. I can't wait to dive into this, because you guys know I am all about, one, questioning leadership when they get a little bit too megalomaniac, which is like, side note, it's like my new favorite word now. It's in crying in H-Mart. Dude, 10 out of 10 recommend. It's my favorite. But anyway, so here's the thing. Like, it's good because you said your leadership, like your direct leadership chain was supportive about it, right? It was like your peers, especially the female peers, were kind of the ones that were like, ooh, maybe we don't.
Yeah, it was more like females, and I wouldn't even say like in the work set, like in my direct workplace, but like just across like Air Force contacts that I have. People that I've met along the way or whatever, and I showed them this and told them about it. And they're not even in my unit, but they were kind of like, ooh, maybe just send it to a certain specific group of people. Yeah. Where this was obviously intended for everyone, and it would benefit everyone. So that was where it came from.
And that's what's so insane to me, because it's like odd and questionable that those people would essentially point blank try to censor information, right? Because here's the thing, you know, the whole point of basic training in any branch, but especially the Air Force, like you join the military and their main motive, especially in the beginning, is to just break down your individualistic identity essentially, and then build you back up as a united front under like an authoritative figure. Like they're very much like, if the boss says this, this is what we do. If the commander-in-chief, aka the president, if he says this is what we're doing, we're all supposed to rally behind that and 100% support it and be like vocally support it, all that stuff. Like basically be blindly loyal, which it works, right? I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's why it's so wild to me, because this isn't just some politicized news article. This isn't like a crazy thing from some random person that's saying, oh, hey, we should do this, we should do that. This is literally like a Department of Defense document signed by the president saying this is what we are implementing and what we need to implement in our military, in our NATO forces, all this stuff. And so that's why it's wild to me that's like, what do you mean you're going to censor our literal boss? Like, that's not how this works. But also, it's interesting to me because I'm like, I'm just curious why they're so worried about you sending it out to everyone. Like, what do they think will happen? You know what I mean? Like, what are they worried about?
That's a good question. I hadn't even considered that, really. I mean, I think maybe ruffling feathers or rubbing people the wrong way because they might interpret it not the way it's intended. Mm-hmm. Because, again, it's a neutral, I mean, it's not a neutral message, it's an active message, but it's, I don't know, if you take it a certain way that I could see people misinterpreting if you don't read it for the full context, mm-hmm. and take some bits of this as, like, women are better at this or are more needed in security decision-making processes, then it starts to become like, well, I don't know that you should send that to everyone. But on top of that, if you felt that way, I would be considering the source. Like, would mm-hmm. White House put out a strategy document saying something like that? Probably not. Not in our current day and age, you know? So, yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know what they would think would happen, but I can only mm-hmm. assume that they might think it would be misinterpreted and might not be worth the fallout that would follow. But, yeah, otherwise, it shouldn't have any, like, ramifications otherwise.
Exactly. And, I mean, also, just coming from, like, the military perspective, whether you agree with it or not, when you join the military, you also kind of signed a clause that says, I will agree with what the president says, whether, you know what I mean? And so it's like, whether you believe in it or not, you kind of have to now because you are serving in the military. So you also signed on that dotted line. You know, I hate to bring up Taylor unless I absolutely have to, but, you know, in my last episode, I'm talking about Taylor Swift and a girl's girl and supporting other females. Like, this is where we actually need the support. We don't need support from, you know, how much she's shown in the NFL. Like, we need support in the work sections, in leadership roles, in authoritative figures. Like, that's where we need women supporting other women. And for the men too, like, and we'll go over it in the document, but they do talk about the men's role in supporting women. But yeah, let's go into it because I do want to dig into the document because there's honestly some pretty cool quotes in here that I really like. Even if you're not military, it's some cool content. I will say some of the phrasing at times sounds a little bit awkward, like the way they use the terms women and girls. I just think they could leave it at women. All I'm saying is, White House, looking at you, just hire me as your writer. We can do better. It'll be great. But yeah, so let's look at this document, all right? So starting right off the bat, literally first page, signed by Joe Biden, he starts off with this is the cool quote. So apparently this is from former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. And she says, societies are more stable if women are politically and economically powered. And that literally, that message runs through this whole memo. And so I love this bit. They say, beyond the moral imperative to advance gender equity and equality around the world, and beyond clear notions of right and wrong, we know that societies do better when women participate. Economies grow, education rates and health outcomes increase, political instability and extremism decline. When women are fully engaged in building and maintaining security in their countries, we see more sustainable outcomes, including less conflict and longer-lasting peace agreements. Put simply, the status of women and girls and the stability of nations are irrevocably linked. Decades of research prove this, as do current conflicts and global crises. We see it in Afghanistan, where women and girls have been denied their fundamental freedoms, including access to education and employment opportunities, thereby fueling a humanitarian crisis and undermining stability. We see it in Iran, where women human rights defenders continue to be killed, wounded, or imprisoned by the Iranian regime for peacefully using their voices to demand democracy and their basic human dignity, and we see it in Russia's brutal and unjust war against Ukraine, where we are once more seeing rape used as a weapon against Ukrainian women. And so he goes on in this whole document, it's like, what, a 50-some page document, 40 pages, basically diving into that. And so that's why it's insane to me, because it's like, this is not necessarily, like, this isn't really a political document. This is literally just our president saying, hey, women deserve an equal role at the table. We've seen it in all of these studies of countries and regimes and societies. Like, they do better when women are involved, which go us, you know? And so it's insane to me that women would be the ones to say, no, let's put a cap on that. Let's keep that one close to our chest. Because when you actually read this document, and it does read pretty easily, it's actually super interesting. And it's very applicable in a military standpoint. But also, if you take some of these messages and apply them to your own workplace or anything like that, like, a lot of these can definitely apply.
Yeah, absolutely. And since it's coming from the top down, it should be easy to adopt a lot of the way this is worded and the way that they're thinking when they wrote this. And I think it's a huge step that there's such a concentrated effort from such a legitimate organization. I mean, the White House is saying that we should be doing this, like creating different ways to express that women being involved in peace and security is an actual fundamental need and necessity to enhance those things. And it all came from, my understanding from reading this and some other things, is it came from like the UN Security Council resolution that kicked off. It also kicked off the gender organization that was started by the White House, but they published that document as a result of the UN resolution on International Women's Day, actually, in 2021, which was kind of cool. Mm-hmm. But that was another thing that came from the Biden administration. So there are so many different ways that this same message is being expressed that it's hard to ignore that this is an intentional line of effort for them.
Yeah, and my thing too with this is, like, if you don't want to put out this information because you see it as a threat to your own job, to your own position, whatever, you need to take a good hard look inward. And that's why I think a lot of the pushback on, like, feminist movements and things of that nature is, or at least what I always hear is, like, the men will get a little spicy and they're like, oh, the girls are just trying to steal our jobs. And it's like, no, if you're a good leader, you shouldn't be worried about anyone else coming in just because of their gender. You know what I mean? I'm like, maybe, you know what I mean? Like, maybe tone down the insecurity a little bit. And and I love one of these quotes from this document. And again, this is set obviously in a military context, but some of these quotes I love so much because they can just so easily apply to social settings and everything like that. So one of these quotes under their theory of change paragraph, they say the work of implementing these agendas requires addressing the root causes of conflict and removing barriers that restrict the ability of women, girls, and all people to freely and safely participate in civic, political, economic, and social life. And that's why I'm like, okay, yes, this is a little bit of a long document, but it's not that long. And so the people that are saying, ooh, Taryn, don't send this out to the unit, I'm like, did you read the document? Because this is telling you, like, do not do this. Like, don't restrict their ability. Don't add barriers to what they can, how they can participate in social and civic and political life. Like, did they read it? Because I don't think they did. Here's another quote. It is important, I can't make this up, direct quote. It is important to engage men and boys to strengthen our understanding of the gendered impact of conflict, to address harmful social norms, increase allyship for women's leadership, and support men and boys' positive contributions to peace and security. And so I really like that one too, because you're right. I think sometimes we hear the term feminism and everyone's, the hair on the back of their neck kind of prickles a little because they're like, ooh, are they going to be crazy? Are they going to be man haters? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, like both genders, I think, play a very important role in setting up an equitable table, essentially, in any workplace, in the military, any setting. Like, if men are still putting down women, it's not going to work. If women are putting down women, it's not going to work. If women are putting down men to elevate their status, it's also not going to work. Like, both parties have an important role, but we just have to actually work together and support that role. Otherwise, it's just going to crumble.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I agree.
It's wild. And this one, I love this too, because they're talking about basically how can they apply this in the workforce and how can they implement this. And Joe Biden, it says, integration and elevation of local voices and the leadership of women and girls is essential for effective implementation of this strategy and to generate buy-in, legitimacy, and sustainability in peace and security processes. And I think the generating buy-in piece is huge here because to me, that means just straight up normalizing it. And that's not going to happen without talking about it, which means we have to acknowledge its existence in the workplace, which means you should be able to send out even just something super small and insignificant, like, hey, people in my unit, here's this new document from your boss that was sent out. Read through it if you can. Here's some highlights. Read the first page, whatever. Like, even something as little as that, I still think it goes a long way because most people, realistically, most people in the military, to myself included, like, I didn't know that this was put out. It wasn't really in my wheelhouse. I wasn't tracking it. And so if no one brings it up to you, how are you supposed to know? You know what I mean? Right. And so it's like literally small stuff like that. Just talk about it, normalize it. And then it's not such a big, scary topic anymore. And the more we address it, the more normal it becomes. And then the less we have to be worried about, ooh, how is this going to be received? Will this ruffle feathers? You don't even have to worry about that because it'll just be a normal piece of conversation at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think understanding, like real understanding of something will abate the fear of a topic. It's just a fear of not necessarily unknown, but kind of just something that someone doesn't fully understand. And not really knowing that feminism, when you're not referencing like radical demographics or sex of the ideology specifically, you're talking about equality across the board and acknowledging the fact that there is a lacking female presence in decision-making processes when it comes to national security in certain countries. We, I think, are a little bit better at it now, but there are other places that aren't so great at it, and it makes it even more necessary to have these conversations and get other people on board because they, like you said, not even aware. I mean, I didn't know this document was put out until that lieutenant colonel sent it to me and let me know they were doing like a brief presentation on it, and they put it out last October, and it's a strategy document. I mean, it's legit, so it's a good thing to be tracking. I just didn't even know it existed, so I'm very glad now that we have this and we can share it and talk about it. But yeah, it'll not only just help us here, but it also has a heavy focus on other countries throughout the world, and there's plenty of examples where women have been breaching into leadership roles and have been successful, wildly successful in their endeavors there in the last like 20 years or so. So, yeah, it's very important.
Well, and they have, which I think is really cool too, because it's, you know, you gotta cite your sources. Like, it's one thing to say something, be like, hey, this is my message, this is great for these reasons. But I love when they actually include, like, basically case studies, like they did in this document, or the research of, like, hey, from this date to this date, you know, like they say, between 1992 and 2019, women averaged only 13% of negotiators, 6% of mediators, and 6% of signatories, which I'm not positive what that is, in major peace processes. And then they go on to say, like, and these were the results. This is what we saw. It was, you know, however much more successful in these countries, or peace treaties lasted for X number of years longer than when, you know, sometimes when the men were negotiators or things of that nature. And so I do want to pause there for a second because I want to add some military stats just for perspective. And so these ones, you know, 13% of negotiators, that's not a lot. 6% of mediators, not a lot. Even up to 2019, so in current times, you know. And even across all the branches in the military, I found an article, again, straight from the Department of Defense, and this was published November of 2023, so pretty recently. Women in active duty military service, again, across all branches, we're still only at 17.5%. That is it. And on the reserve side, we're up to 21.6%, which that is an increase on both, like in the active side and in the reserve side. We're seeing more women joining now over the years, but still 17 and 21% is not a lot. And so I think, I mean, obviously we got to boost those numbers up, right? Like, we need more representation, especially in leadership roles, I think, because even like this document shows, like, women do well in leadership roles. There's no reason why we can't be in those same positions that men are in. I think we just need to be given the shot to actually do some of these things. And so again, it's like, we work so hard. There are so many social barriers in place still to even get us to a seat at the table. And it's like, once we're there, then we're going to have women in our peers and in our work centers. We're still going to have women saying, like, let's not talk about, let's not ruffle feathers. Let's not take up any more space. That's what's insane to me.
I think that's some of the traditional, like, it's like almost extremely traditional, like, female role. Like, you know, be agreeable and say the things that you need to say and be proper and all that stuff.
We're always the ones that are the secretaries. We're always the execs. We're always the ones taking the notes at the meetings. Like, it's insane.
It's so crazy. Funny that you say that, because someone just came back. They were deployed and said that there were females that were working in the military where they were, but they were all of those positions, just the ones you just said.
It's wild. And again, it's like, did you read this document? Because here's another quote. Where relevant, U.S. departments and agencies will provide guidance, training, and education on integrating and mainstreaming women's studies and all that and broader gender equality initiatives across existing government programs. Like, literally just, to me, this means pushing out the information down to each flight, each work section. Like, get women in those roles. Like, we've shown that we can do it. Like, reduce these barriers. And, I mean, like they say here, like, you know, do all these things to participate in all of these scenarios, all these security settings. In doing so, we strive for inclusive representation of the U.S. Armed Forces across security cooperation engagements with an understanding that diversity enhances the strength and capabilities of the workforce. Like, point blank. And so to me, it's so silly that we know all of this. We've seen the data, we've seen the stats, and they still want to push back. I do recommend, honestly, even if you're not in the military, any of my listeners out there, actually look at this document. And like I said, actually read through it, glance through it, because it does have a lot of really good nuggets of information of things that we should probably be doing in our workplace. And even, like I said, even just in social settings. I do want to take the time to throw in a book recommendation for y'all. It's called Lean In, Women, Work, and the Will to Lead. It's by Sheryl Sandberg. And it was recommended to me, I mean, way back in the day, probably like, I was still pretty new in the military and I was just starting to get into quote unquote leadership positions. And I use that term loosely because it was probably like it was like my first steps of responsibility, like right after, you know, Airman Leadership School, being a frontline manager, probably when I got my first troop, things like that. But it's an amazing book. And it's about how women are held back in leadership roles, but sometimes more often we are holding ourselves back from success for all of those reasons that you just said, Taryn, right? Like, oh, you know, can't take up space, don't want to ruffle feathers, you want to be just agreeable, things of that nature. And this book is based off of a TED Talk that she did back in like 2010. And she talks about, of course, gender differences, but she also gives a lot of practical advice for achieving goals. And then her big thing is to literally physically lean in at the table. So if you're at a meeting, don't try and be as small as you can with your ankles crossed, you know, at the back corner of the room. Like, lean in, put your elbows on the table, like physically and metaphorically lean into that space, take up space, and voice your concerns, your questions, your ideas. It's a really, really good book. I definitely recommend it. You guys should all take a look at it sometimes. But Taryn, I do want to kind of talk about your experience so far in the military, because you are higher ranking now. You are officially in the senior non-commissioned officer tier. Congrats, by the way, on your promotion. And so your career, because you're in weather, so for people that aren't in the military, or if you're not familiar with it, I think sometimes we hear weather forecaster and we think like, oh, you're telling people if it's going to rain or not, and it's 50% chance, right? But it's actually a really, really cool job. So it's like you are essentially forecasting for, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? But this is how I understand it. Like you're forecasting for all of the flights of like, hey, you can take off, no, you can't, or launching missiles or drones, like cool stuff, right? And then you can also have the opportunity to like brief the pilots before they take off and be like, hey, yo, you're going to have some gnarly, I don't know, crosswinds or whatever they're called or something. You know what I mean? Right? So it's like, it's a really, really cool job. And it is pretty male dominated, I would say. I mean, even more so than just the military being male dominated. So how has that been for you thus far in your career?
Honestly, well, so to kind of like draw back from your book reference, I think in my most recent assignment, that's very applicable, just because when we do have meetings and stuff, because it's a smaller unit and it's very officer heavy, and most of them are male, and that's great. It's an added barrier though, because I do have a little bit of that, like I'm a female and kind of don't want to like overstep, I guess. Mm-hmm. I'm also enlisted, so I'm in these in these meetings, and I'm supposed to be like the weather expert at the table, honestly. So I do need to speak up, but that's been kind of difficult for me to do to the level that I need to get my information through because of that added barrier that I have. But I've been working through it. Honestly, being in weather is probably the best career field that could get me to the point where I am now. I broke through my fear of public speaking and briefing in general by just doing it over and over again. And briefing, I think, like, higher ranking people has been very helpful too in realizing, like, it sounds cheesy, but it's true. They're just people, and they have to sit there through your brief, whether or not you like it. So you're just gonna have to do it, and it's fine. Like, every single time, even if you get questions and you don't necessarily know the answer right away, it's a confidence booster, and I think it's definitely shaped me quite a bit because it's been a minute that I've been doing this at this point. And the fact that it's male dominated definitely has been, it's not necessarily an obstacle, but it's something to consider as far as, like, the environment that you're in, because it's significant. I mean, whenever I was at the hub at Scott, all the dudes would, like, get together and go to the smoke pit. Granted, they were there to smoke, but none of the girls went and did that, and that was just a bonding experience that they all had together that you really don't partake in unless you smoke. But none of the girls did, so they kind of just all stayed inside, and we would watch the forecast while they were all outside, like, hanging out. And that's pretty standard, honestly, for, like, a weather operations floor. And it's not a bad thing. It's great for bonding purposes and hanging out and, like, being with your coworkers. But that there's small examples like that are just kind of, like, I wouldn't say isolating, but they're, like I said, something to consider. And those little things have, I think, helped me become more comfortable in my own skin because I've found ways to work around them and get my job done, just, like, despite those things, and find ways to make things positive, which I've had a lot of really positive experiences. I would say that I was embedded in a DGS, which is an intel unit, at my last base, and that was a huge growth area for me because of all the briefing that I did while I was there. So, it's been very good for my professional and personal growth to be in this career field, and that it's male dominated has just made me, I think, more resilient.
I mean, damn, that sounds so cool sometimes. Like, when I hear jobs like that, I'm like, God, you guys have it cool. I'm over here, handing out ibuprofen to retirees, but, like...
Don't knock the ibuprofen, man. That's the
saves lives, you know what I mean? Ibuprofen will save lives. I swear, the military is surviving off of caffeine, nicotine, and ibuprofen. But no, I mean, and so it's amazing that you get the personal and the professional growth from that. But it also sometimes kind of makes me think, it's like, okay, but, like, is that overall for the best? Yes. But isn't it kind of crazy to think that, like, you have to be stretched and thinned and kind of groomed in order to succeed in that role, but, like, men don't have to? You know what I mean? That's always kind of my thought. Or the other thing, too, is, like, leaders are seen as masculine, right? We have that stereotype, that unconscious bias that men are better leaders, men are more authoritative. A lower, deeper voice is seen as, it's listened to more, right? And so it's kind of crazy that it's like in a male-dominated role, a lot of times women have to assume a male persona almost in order to be successful and in order to succeed. And so, I mean, in a perfect world, in the future, generations from now, would I love to see that not be the case? Absolutely. Do I also recognize that that is a real world now? Yes, I do. Like, I've done that too. Like, I think we've all done that. In order to succeed, you do kind of have to step up, step out, and sometimes assume a role that's not comfortable for you, that's not your natural persona, in order to be seen as inherently successful. And honestly, in order to even get that leadership role, which kind of sucks, but I mean, it is what it is. And I do think I kind of got lucky there, because my experience with it has honestly been pretty good overall, but you also have to remember I'm pharmacy, I'm medical, and so that's a female driven career field. And so I think that kind of definitely worked in my favor. Honestly, the only thing I've kind of experienced with this particular kind of like gender bias, if you will, with the military has honestly just been like, which they're always well-intentioned, right? But like the well-intentioned assumptions of rank and authority, like between me and Daniel, because everyone assumes when they find out we're both military, they always just assume that he's higher ranking because he's the guy. And so then when they find out that I outrank him, they always say like the little subliminal jokes of like, oh, you know, I must wear the pants in the relationship, or oh, does, you know, Daniel's being emasculated, or does he feel like a house husband just because I outrank him? Like, it's such a shock for people. And it's like, why? I don't know. Again, why do we have to assume that men go with authoritative figures and women by default don't? I don't think that should be the case, but again, in reality it is, unfortunately. But I will say there were a couple times when I was a tour guide at the Pentagon where our tour group was a bunch of military leaders from, I don't even remember which countries they were. They were like Arabic countries though. And so women weren't allowed to be in the military. They sure as shit weren't allowed to be in any sort of leadership or authoritative position. And I was the primary tour guide. And so, so for a split second, like in the very beginning of the tour, like I walk out and I'm like, hey, I think at that time I was a senior airman, whatever. I'm like, I'm senior airman Stanley. I'm going to be your tour guide, blah, blah, blah. And for that split second, they were kind of like, you could see them. They like look at me, they look me up and down, they look at each other. They kind of like puff out their chest a bit, and you could tell they were like, nah, we're not going to listen to her. Like, we're not going to literally follow her around and listen to her. Let her lead us. And then there was this like slight unspoken power struggle. But I'm a Stanley, right? Like, I'm spicy. So I put on my big girl pants. I use my big girl voice. And I'm like, no, I am your tour guide. You can either be my tour or you can walk the fuck out the door. Like, there's the exit, you know? I didn't say that. I was very diplomatic. But, you know, like we absolutely kind of had this like unspoken power struggle at first. And then they were like, okay, we'll listen. And then, you know, everything was good and there were no problems on the tour. But like, it's absolutely a thing, you know? And like the team leads told us from the start when we joined that program, they were like, hey, like this is gonna happen. And so I remember we actually had to like, during our evaluations and stuff, they were like, okay, I'm going to be the angry person that doesn't listen to you because you're a female. How are you going to respond? How are you going to react? What are you going to do? Whatever. But yeah, I mean, it was a cool experience. I don't know if I'd really, no, I would want to do it again. I would absolutely do it again. But yeah, dude, it's wild out there.
Huh, wow, I didn't know that one.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was cool though. It was fun. I don't know. Like I said, I think in a perfect world, we all just have a seat at the table. Wouldn't that be nice if we could just all have an equal seat at the table? That's all I want.
Oh my gosh! Yes,
isn't that the dream?
Yeah.
Ugh. But
when you talk about like going through the weather career field, if I were to like think about all of that, but with equal parts male and female, and you could kind of like still be heard without having to be more, not necessarily just assertive, but a little bit aggressive with your input, I would be over the moon. And I really do hope that that's the direction we're going. And there's, through this document and other committees that are being formed, I think it's going that direction. I'm pretty excited about that.
Mm-hmm. Me too. So while we kind of wrap up this episode, do you have any advice for women in non-traditional roles or like STEM environments, women specifically that are in very male-driven career field?
I do. I definitely would encourage anyone in that environment to just continue to build your own self-worth and know that what you have to contribute is always valuable. And keep being as sharp as you are at what you're doing. And if you're kind of more on your own, like you don't have a lot of other females around you, which hopefully that's not always the case, but that can be kind of like I said, a little isolating. just try to keep your friendships and find friendships in your workplace and use those as much as possible, because being a female in a STEM environment it's not necessarily a breakthrough anymore. It's all over the place, but it's still definitely not as prevalent as we're trying to get to. As we saw with the percentages that you were kind of providing earlier and that are cited throughout the document that we were reading. But yeah, I think just like sticking with what you're doing and what you're passionate about and keep pushing.
Hell yeah. I love that. See, you're such like a kind-hearted person. That's why I love you. Because you're just like so sweet all the time, you know?
Love you too. You guys, you Stanley sisters make it easy.
Oh, thanks. And then last question, because I'm dying to know, what have you been reading or listening to these days?
Oh, I love this. Okay, I love this question. Well, obviously I've been listening to your podcast.
Hey!
Yeah. Shout out. Love it. Me and my dad loves it to death. He listens to it nonstop. He's listened to episodes I haven't even heard yet. And I'm like, Dad,
no spoilers.
He's probably like, he's a big fan. Aww. And I've been reading Bhagavad-Gita, which isn't, it's a little off the wall. It's an Indian spirituality book. It's been very, very enlightening because some of the concepts, so the premise of it is basically there's one individual who's going to war against his family, essentially.
Been there. Sorry.
Oh, been there before. Haven't we all at some point, man? It's rough out here. But, yeah, he's essentially going to war with his family. Nobody really wants to do that. That sucks. So he's kind of like going through an internal struggle. And he has a guide with him who is kind of walking him through the mentalities that will get him to the best possible outcome. And it's framed as a war, but it's a huge analogy for like walking you through life and giving you advice on how to like deal with and handle the struggles throughout that journey. And it's very relevant, all of it. Anyone who reads it will get something from it. Yeah, it's been really, really good. I think the thing that stuck out to me most so far is selfless action. So basically, like taking action in a scenario without any return in mind and letting go entirely of the results of the scenario. So you can try your very best, but you won't achieve true happiness unless you let go of your expectation of the outcome and your ownership that you have over that. That's where disappointment and unhappiness and all of that stuff comes from, and I'm going on forever, but that's the short of it. It's a really good book, and it's good for framing your mindset positively and working towards things that you want without expecting what you want to come out of it.
Dang, that sounds so good. I need to add that on my list. Where did you even find this book? Like, where did you hear of this?
I saw it in a bookshop in LA a long time ago, and it's called I think it's The Last Bookshop or something similar, but it's huge. It's a huge, ridiculous library. It has all these old books, including some from like all of the moon landings, like really like original copies of those books for very cheap. So it's just stuff like that. They also have like religious sections and stuff. It's really, really cool. Mm-hmm. So off the beaten path, kind of, but yeah.
Dang, that's so cool. I love bookstores like that. Those are the best.
They're great. If you're in LA, I definitely recommend. You would love it.
Oh yeah, dude, I'd be lost in there. That's my dream.
It's perfect.
Oh yeah. Alrighty. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. We will wrap it up there. As always, make good choices, be a decent human being, take care of each other, support the females in your life, please and thank you. And I will catch y'all next time. Okay, bye!